previously on the Abraham Accords.
My vision presents a win-win opportunity for both sides.
These were the scenes across Gaza and the West Bank as the Bahrain Conference got underway. Thousands of Palestinians against a plan they say attempts to buy them off.
Every single time they refused to come to the negotiating table.
The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Oman sent their ambassadors.
What will the Arab governments do, like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan? If they like the Trump peace plan, then there'll be pressure on the Palestinians to actually think about it.
In the ancient history of the Middle East, a man named Abraham received a promise from God that he would become the father of many nations. The Bnei Yisrael are the Jewish descendants of Abraham's son Isaac from his wife Sarah. The Bnei Yishmael are the Arabic descendants of Abraham's son Ishmael from his wife's handmaiden Hagar. From the house of Israel, the Jewish prophet Moses would be born, and the Torah would be written. Centuries later, from the house of Israel, Jesus, the Messiah of the Christian faith, would be born, and the New Testament would be written. From the house of Ishmael, the Islamic prophet Muhammad would be born, and the Quran would be written. Through the centuries, the three religions of the Abrahamic faith have collided. In no place more so than Jerusalem. With the fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, ancient nations were restored in the Middle East, including the state of Israel, fulfilling Old Testament prophecies. And every U.S. president since has tried, with greater or lesser success, to build the alliances needed for a lasting peace. Recently, at an unlikely time, with an unlikely group, led by an unlikely president, nations of the divided faiths of Abraham came together against all odds and laid a foundation for peace that bears the name of their common father, the Abraham Accords. President Trump announced the administration's plan for greater Middle East peace in January of 2020. None of us could have imagined that he was doing so on the eve of a worldwide health crisis.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
Even though a few countries had responded well to our plan behind closed doors, we had to reckon with the possibility that, as had happened often before, the decades-old Arab-Israeli conflict might take a back seat to more pressing and immediate concerns.
Where were we as an administration in August of 2020? COVID had at that point in time spiraled, out of control. Nobody knew what to read because all of the information that we had seemed to be changing on a daily basis. The president's approval rating was probably at its lowest. The feeling within the people in the White House was one of, where was the next punch coming from? And there were successes, but nobody was celebrating them and nobody was recognizing them.
There were moments when there was some risk that this wouldn't come together. World events intervening, challenges in Syria, threats from the Iranian regime.
Israeli politics.
Israeli politics. There were many obstacles on the path. This was not a straight line for sure. We may well fail, but we know that path. We know how that path ends. We've seen this. We were determined to go try and lay the groundwork and the conditions consistent with the goals and objectives of each of these leaders, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Zayed, and shoulder to shoulder to deliver what we knew were good outcomes for all of us.
Before the UAE deal was announced, were you ever confident this was going to get done?
No.
People don't realize that it's an enormous risk to change the status quo, especially the status quo, in the Middle East. It comes down to one word. It comes down to trust.
Trust takes a long time, right? It's not instant. You don't have it all of a sudden. We have built up a very significant amount of trust with the Trump administration and my government back in the UAE.
Everybody wants to be involved in these negotiations, right? There's the quartet, which is made up of the EU, the UN, Russia, and the United States. There's the EU as its own body that has a foreign minister who goes around and tries to act as the main negotiator. Russia always wants to be the main negotiator of the Middle East. They're very much involved in the Middle East. There was always this sort of tug and pull of, why are you guys the ones that get to lead this? We were negotiating with capital. These deals are not possible without the president. If the president doesn't build that capital with our allies and with our partners, they'll just try to wait the time out to potentially see who comes next. The success of the Abraham Accords has to also be understood in that context, because what we ended up doing as a result was reestablishing, reaffirming United States leadership on this most important issue in the international stage and for the international community. But it's also extremely important for Israel's sake that a country like the United States is leading these negotiations, because the worst thing that could happen is that countries come together to try to pressure Israel to make a deal that is not in its interests from a security standpoint, from a regional standpoint, from an economic standpoint.
I think in the Middle East, unfortunately, you're strong or you're dead. Those are sort of the choices.
International buy-in is not something to just be discounted. It's important, and Jared was extremely intent on building that consensus, meeting with the leadership to ensure that they felt that they had the proper buy-in. You just have to have people understand that these are your positions, you stand by them, you do so with integrity, and I think they respect you more for it as a result.
There's no question. And I believe that people respect us when we believe in something, we stand for something greater than ourselves. I think that resonates within the world, especially in the Arab world, which is a religious world.
Abraham was the first believer. and Abraham identified, committed to, and followed the one true God. Abraham was promised to be great. Not Isaac, not Ishmael. Abraham was promised to be great. That all of his descendants would be blessed. You've found a reunification of people who say, we are looking to continue in Abraham's path.
I remember being on the phone the night before the phone call, August 12th. Are we ready? Are we really going to do this? Are we on? Yeah, let's go. There was no hesitation.
I'll never forget that day. We sat there, maybe 10 of us. You handled the call. You spoke to the Prime Minister and the Crown Prince, and they all agreed, you and the two of them under your supervision, agreed to normalize and to make peace. Then there were only 10 of us in the room, but we burst into a spontaneous applause. It must have lasted 10 minutes.
Nobody knew anything until the President of the United States tweeted out a joint statement between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States.
Israel and the United Arab Emirates have agreed on normalizing relations.
They sure kept it a secret. Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Zayed, the surprise of the year.
The startling, surreal, stunning surprise of 2020. In a year marked by disease, disinformation, disharmony, it was the Middle East, of all places, that supplied a hint of hope.
One of the few highlights of 2020, maybe the only highlight of 2020. As we were walking into the Oval Office, somebody turns around and says, it's called the Abraham Accord, or the Abraham Accords. And Jared's like, Accords, of course. And after the phone call, the president hangs up the phone, he looks around the room, he goes, who's next?
Abraham, as many of you know, was the father of all three great faiths. He's referred to as Abraham in the Christian faith, Ibrahim in the Muslim faith, and Abraham in the Jewish faith. And no person better symbolizes the potential for unity among all these three great faiths than Abraham.
About 5 hours later, we're sitting in Jared's office, and Jared says, I just spoke with the president. The president's given us specific instructions. Make this happen, facts on the ground, go big and go fast. Which is great, except who's gonna go big and who's gonna go fast? This part was not dictated at that point in time.
Lighting up City Hall in Tel Aviv tonight, the blue and white of Israel, and as well, the green, white, black, and red of the United Arab Emirates.
Already that day, we received calls from other countries about being next. We had to chase countries just to talk about it prior to that.
Right.
We're not talking about progress happening over 50 years. We're talking about daily, massive progress.
My favorite part of the entire Abraham Accords is that it didn't leak. It never came out. And this is abnormal for Washington, as all of you know.
We had to travel around the globe to get this deal.
And every time you got on a plane, everybody knew about it.
And yet, they didn't know why. They didn't know what the conversations were. I mean, you and I sat with the Prime Minister of Israel. There's 4 people in the room. Nobody knew a thing.
Nobody talked to the press. Nobody leaked anything. It worked the way it's supposed to work because that level of trust was inherent between all of us.
Mohammed, UAE, he's so respected, and the country is respected. So having him be the first to sign was a tremendous thing. Great honor.
The first of the Abraham Accords is between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. You went first.
This was a natural progression that started many, many years with Israel. Small steps, tournaments, conferences, conventions, and so on and so forth.
The Emirates and Israel have been developing relations for many years.
Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, probably the most influential Arab politician in our time. He's stepping out of the shadows.
I mean, if you had asked me, I would have said, yes, we would have a relationship with Israel, but it would be more in 2023, 2024, sort of relationship that had to cross a certain threshold, in my opinion. But I think also that opportunity that came with the freeze of the annexation.
Israel has agreed to suspend plans to annex part of the occupied West Bank. The Crown Prince stressed that the agreement would stop further Israeli annexation of Palestinian territories, which Israel has said was waiting for approval from Washington.
The decision to annex at the time, which was a real threat towards what we would like to see as room for further Israeli-Palestinian negotiations.
Not everyone is satisfied. The Palestinians see themselves pushed to the sidelines.
It was quite a bold move by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, and I think it was clear in his mind that this decision is fraught with challenges, but at the same time, longer term, this is good for the UAE, good for the region, and good for everybody. I add to that, without the American conduit, it would have been very, very difficult for us to cross this bridge. We didn't really know the Israelis, we didn't know the various actors, we didn't know how to move forward.
The United Arab Emirates' relationship with Israel was not at all hostile, but it was young. The Emirates' relationship with the United States was stronger and longer.
In the case of the Emirates, there's been few battlefields where the Americans have been present where Emirati soldiers have not been present with us, including Afghanistan.
Afghanistan was the longest serving deployment. We were there with you 12 years.
Wow.
We served with you in Kosovo.
Right.
We served with you in Somalia. We are the only Arab country to ever deploy with the United States 6 times in the last 30 years.
We've worked for decades with our Israeli counterparts. We've worked for decades with our friends in the Emirates and Bahrain and in Morocco and even in Sudan. And so we understand them, and our marriage counseling was an essential service. And actually, I think that's a good thing. I think it helps to have someone else to talk to in a relationship, to be able to say, I'm not sure this is working, and I think we need some fix.
Jared Kushner and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien show up. We get on the El Al plane from Tel Aviv to the UAE, flying over Saudi airspace with an Israeli and American delegation.
Riyadh now says that it will allow commercial flights between Israel and the United Arab Emirates to use Saudi airspace.
Today we are making history. Today we are living history. Today is the first direct flight from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi ever.
A journey of peace, they say. The word displayed in the 3 languages of the brokers of the deal, which allowed it to happen.
We clapped at the announcement on takeoff, and there was this feeling of elation. People were passing around menus, signed the menus. People were like taking the seat cushions. This is a memorial seat cushion. Anything to sort of remember that moment.
That first flight, getting on the El Al plane, I still have my boarding pass. That's something I will frame and keep. We had the first meeting of Israel and Abu Dhabi business people, so it was the first joint meeting. And then, of course, we flew back the first Emirates flight here. The finance minister of UAE came with me on that plane. We were greeted by the Prime Minister.
Just a few months later, when they tried to condemn peace between Israel and an Arab country at the Arab League, they could not convene.
The Arab League has voted against condemning a peace agreement between the United Arab Emirates and Israel.
Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, he was the sitting chairman at that point of the Arab League. He convened a meeting to condemn the countries to...
and he failed.
He couldn't even get the meeting. He actually had to walk out of his own meeting because nobody was willing to participate.
Go back to Egypt and look at the change that happened in the 40 years. When Sadat made peace with Israel, it was rejected by every single Arab state. It was rejected by Arab populations throughout the region to the extent that you measure public opinion. And Sadat himself paid for that peace with his life. Fast forward 40 years to understand the strategic shift that has taken place. When MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, made this decision to make peace with Israel, it was accepted by several Arab countries. Many of them were silent, which speaks volumes in the diplomacy of the Middle East. The Arab populations throughout the region, there was strong bases of support, broader and wider than people thought. The Arab League basically rejected Abu Mazen's efforts to turn it against this peace. We were living in a different world. And the Trump administration's decisions led to the space where these Arab leaders could then go and make peace with Israel. It confronted Iran, it embraced Israel, and it took away the veto power from the Palestinians.
Most people don't know this, but negotiating the Abraham Accords really only took about 4 weeks. That's a breathtakingly quick process of a very complex issue. The people that were involved in the negotiations knew where we wanted to go. For the sake of protecting the deal and getting it right and not having people second guess it, well, wait, what about this, what about that? I think it was important to keep it in a tight circle for this to get over the finish line in the way and the time that it did.
People would say to me often when we were getting to the finish line on the Abraham Accords, they'd say it's all about Iran, it's all about military and intelligence. And I said, what I think it is, I think it's about extremism versus moderation. Rejecting extremism, embracing modernity, cooperation, religious tolerance. Those to me were the themes.
I agree. I mean, we live in a very tight region. We share this water with Iran. We have our differences, but I think these differences need to be addressed diplomatically, politically. And that's why, from our perspective, the Abrahamic Accords are not about really new geostrategic alliances against Iran or against any other party. That's the way we understand it. Mm-hmm. It will be ludicrous to build new bridges with Israel and to burn ancient bridges with Iran. But it's definitely about changing the calculus, about moving from a region where conflict and deadlocks are seen as norms. The Abrahamic Accords are really about the UAE and how it sees itself in the world in terms of reaching out to the Jewish state. It's economic, it's cultural. It's also building a network that can help and support the Israelis and Palestinians reach an agreement.
The United Arab Emirates had led the way. The next country to immediately join the Accords was Bahrain.
Just a few moments ago, I hosted a historic call between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and King Hamad Al Khalifa of Bahrain. Both leaders expressed their condolences as well on this very, very tragic, horrible event that took place on September 11th. There's no more powerful response to the hatred that spawned 9/11 than the agreement that we're about to tell you. In the spirit of peace and cooperation, both leaders agreed that Bahrain will fully normalize its diplomatic relations with Israel. They will exchange embassies and ambassadors, begin direct flights between their countries, and launch cooperation initiatives across a broad range of sectors. This is a truly historic day.
The Abraham Accords was announced, and I heard that Bahrain was going to be one of the countries that was going to sign up. For me, it was a dream come true. Growing up Jewish in Bahrain, I never believed in my lifetime was going to happen.
It is in our Bahraini DNA. We believe in coexistence and we practice it. We live it. We believe in tolerance. We believe in dialogue. We believe in respecting each other. We believe in not interfering in the affairs of others. These are our principles and our values, and also persistence. The region needs somewhere, somehow, a different approach to reach prosperity, security, safety, and hopefully development. But we need to work together. We need each other. These values, I know, are shared by the American people.
To be one of the people who actually went for the signing of the Abraham Accords in Washington, D.C. was such an honor.
We spent a lot of time the night before up till late, making sure everything was planned out appropriately. We wanted to make sure that the guests that we had, Bahrain and Israel and the United Arab Emirates were all treated with respect, and that they felt like the day was going to accomplish the messaging that they wanted to accomplish, because they had a lot of risks that they were taking in the region.
It's been 26 years since the last peace agreement between Israel and an Arab state, that being Israel and Jordan, and now 2 within a month.
I don't know that I was ever more inspired than to be on the South Lawn on a sunny day, to see the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Israel, sit down with leaders of Arab nations inside the Abraham Accords. History-making progress.
That was an experience that I lived during that sunny day. It was a bright day, and to be frank, I believed, I said, it's a message that this bright day is for a bright future.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
Truly felt the pulse of history. And I remember the long road that Israel took and that I took.
I am so deeply moved to be here today. For those who bear the wounds of war cherish the blessings of peace.
I remembered my brother who died saving Israeli and Jewish hostages in the heart of Africa. This was the culmination of a decades-old effort to establish Israel's security, its prominence as a strong and independent country, and as a strong ally of the United States. It just vindicated everything that we had said, everything that I had said just exactly 4 years earlier at the United Nations. I said, there's peace to be had. The Arab countries are waiting for it. And I knew that this was significant not only for that moment, but I think for many generations to come.
I was standing by my friend Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed and the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States. And I said, my God, a Bahraini man raised by illiterate parents is bringing a message from His Majesty the King and from the people of Bahrain to the entire world, saying, we believe in respect, coexistence, and peace. Why don't these values be spread over the Middle East? And why don't we pursue a path of peace? I was so proud of being a Bahraini.
The symbolism of having the different leaders there together from the Arab countries and from Israel, convened by the United States of America, really was the signaling of the dawn of a new era.
That was incredible.
The late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, he spoke about the importance of leadership giving people hope. And he differentiated hope from optimism and said the following: hope is not a passive virtue like optimism. Optimism is the belief that everything will be okay. Right. Hope is the belief that we have to make it okay. And without hope in this region, and by the way, it takes a great deal of courage to have hope because you have to be very, very active. That is what the Abraham Accords represent. A little bit of a paternalistic sort of onlookers from the outside that cannot understand this, because we are the people of the region.
Right.
And the Abrahamic faiths, yes, they all began here. We have to pave the path forward for that hope for our children, for our grandchildren, in this country, in the region, and beyond.
As we were working on the initiative, I don't think we were thinking of the name. I'm still trying to find out who is the originator of the phrase. I was speaking to our ambassador in Washington, Yusuf, at the time, and he said, you know, there's a consensus that we might call it the Abrahamic Accord or the Abraham Accord. And I said, you know, that's quite interesting, you know, because it gives it a certain, I would say, depth, and it gives it a simplicity. People, you know, sort of equate with it and empathize with it. And then it becomes an umbrella where various countries are signing their own very different agreements, but under the same umbrella. The term itself changes what is essentially a dry legal text into something that, in my opinion, becomes a little bit more visionary.
The Abraham Accords, facing a challenge that segregated people for such a long time, it will have a huge impact, not only economically. That will happen, and it started to happen, over 80 projects in less than a year. The impact it will have on our children mindset, on their children mindset, there's nothing impossible. It's just we got used to so many things that not going through and not happening, and that made us feel that impossible is kind of part of our life.
delegation marking history by taking the first ever commercial nonstop flight from Israel to Manama, Bahrain.
To be on that first flight from Bahrain to Tel Aviv, GF 972, was another honor.
For the first time ever, Israeli citizens could travel for business or pleasure to the UAE and Bahrain. Likewise, citizens from Bahrain and the UAE could finally visit Israel, including Jerusalem, the holy city.
From Tel Aviv, we went to Jerusalem. We had a lot of meetings there.
Bahrain has been open and welcoming, and tolerant is the wrong word, loving. So when you told me it was your first time to Israel, I couldn't wrap my mind around that. And then you were in Jerusalem, and I'm like, okay, well, obviously you're going to get to the Western Wall. And you're like, it's not on the agenda.
You whisked me away in a car.
We were running against the clock because you had to be back by 4 p.m. or whatever else it would be. We got one of the drivers from the embassy.
To go to the Wailing Wall was just an out-of-this-world experience. I felt this was my second home. I felt I was coming home. So it was a very interesting and emotional time for me.
Shelves full of books called The Arab-Israeli Conflict, The Israel-Arab Conflict. Potentially, those books are no longer. The Arab-Israeli conflict, at this moment in time, there's a big question over that. Is there an Arab-Israeli conflict? Because we see a potential for a shift that is so deep, understanding that what unites us far, far outweighs what divides us, and our shared values and our shared history.
The UAE and Bahrain signed bilateral agreements with Israel in September of 2020. In October, Israel and Sudan normalized relations as well.
Sudan and Israel have agreed to normalize their diplomatic relations. And now Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced that in the coming days, a delegation of Israeli envoys will visit Sudan to completely formalize the deal.
When broadening diplomatic relationships between nations, it is often necessary to rely on security relationships that have been quietly at work behind the scenes. The identities of security personnel are most often kept confidential.
I remember when we landed in Sudan for the first time with no cover, no backup, nobody knew we were going there. And I remember they gave us these satellite phones that we can call anybody in the world and we would be perfectly fine. And we land, and I turn on my satellite phone. There's no battery in the satellite phone. I'm like, oh my God, I did not want to get off the airplane. And you put your arm around me and says, don't worry about it, you're with me. And we walked immediately into the presidential palace. We were treated royally, but there was that trust immediately in the eyes of the leadership there, and they knew that when they were dealing with you, you spoke directly on behalf of the Prime Minister of Israel.
You need to understand that you're going to some place that no Israeli has been official. In my previous work, when you go to some place, you got a lot of security around you. A lot. Okay, you feel safe sometimes, but I think you feel safe better if you trust the other guy. When you got the trust and you got the contact, it's good enough to do almost everything. When we go to the other countries, for the new country, it's a new country totally. We strongly need the US because Israel alone cannot do a lot. They don't have the research and the...
It's a 9 million person country.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, but they need the US much more.
Much more.
Much more. They prefer the US contact than other contacts. When you sit a new country that considered to be your enemy or something like that, and you put up the phone and you call your friends from the US, and its answer, and you speak like a friend, that's mean everything.
In December, Morocco joined the Accords.
Morocco is the latest Arab country after the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Sudan to normalize ties with Israel.
By El Al Airlines, nonstop from Tel Aviv to Rabat, Israel ushers in its normalization with the 6th Arab country and 4 in the last 4 months.
After spending 72 years trying to reach peace and only having 2 partners, in 4 months, we got partner number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6.
Although the 7th treaty was not technically part of the Abraham Accords, in February of 2021, Israel established its first diplomatic ties with a Muslim-majority country in Europe, the nation of Kosovo.
Well, Donald Trump may be out of office, but the momentum he created among countries normalizing ties with Israel is not dying out just yet. Israel and Kosovo will establish full diplomatic relations this week in a virtual signing ceremony with Israel's Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi. Israel has agreed in exchange to recognize Kosovo's independence.
A great move by Kosovo government and Israeli government, intermediated by US.
Across these countries, embassies and missions opened for the very first time, or reopened for the first time in decades.
Kosovo says it'll put its embassy in Jerusalem.
This morning I received your formal request, Madam Minister, to open your embassy in Jerusalem, which of course I approve.
Israel's mission to Morocco reopened this week after 20 years of being shut.
The Israeli consulate in Dubai also opened 2 days after the Israeli embassy in the United Arab Emirates opened in Abu Dhabi, its capital.
When I got out of the elevator and I saw the sign, Embassy of the State of Israel, it hit me. You know, the results of the Abraham Accords right here. I mean, there's nothing more tangible than an embassy, you know, with an Israeli flag in a country that had no relations with Israel until just a few months ago.
For me, it's still a wonder. I get up in the morning and pinch myself. It's still the talk of the town.
When was the last time Israel opened an embassy? In 2 months. So
during COVID.
And during COVID, yes.
The synergy is amazing. Really, areas of cooperation span from space to the National Archives, I mean, and everything in between. There are flights, there are Israelis visiting here. You can hear Hebrew. Here in restaurants, in the hotels. Soon we'll open a corridor for tourists to visit both countries.
It's easier for me to get a kosher sandwich in Abu Dhabi than in Washington, D.C.
I think that's so great. That's fabulous.
Isn't that amazing?
And everywhere we go, you know, people ask questions about Jewish traditions, Jewish practices. It's fascinating. It comes from, you know, being a century apart.
We want people to take it for granted that Jews and Christians and Muslims can live together and respect each other's religions and live, you know, differently, but live together. I want to thank you for the part you're playing in doing that.
As an Israeli, and as an Israeli diplomat who's been on the job for 30 years, well, I would like to thank you on behalf of a grateful nation for your contribution. You, as America, invested so much in resources, in material aid, in human lives to make this region peaceful. America, it was heavily involved in making peace between Israel and Egypt, the Camp David Accord, peace between Israel and Jordan. And now, without American, really magnificent stagecraft, the Abrahamic Accords wouldn't have happened. I think that we are too close yet to the event to fully appreciate what has happened. We're developing something very unique, a model of peace for others in the region to see and to ask themselves, and I'm quoting here His Highness Sheikh Abdallah, the Foreign Minister of this country, asking themselves, why not us? Blessed are the peacemakers. Now, we may differ on the way sometimes on how to make peace happen, but you cannot argue with success.
We can have this relationship with Israel where we can trade and invest and do research and get to know each other, but also have political disagreements. And I think that's the path we've chosen. And hopefully that breaks the mindset that we've had in the Middle East for the last several decades, where it's we're not going to talk to them, we're not going to engage because of something. And that something is still there. We can still address it, but we can address it while we're actually at the table.
They're neighbors, they live close to each other. So up to this point, they've not been communicating. And how important that is, I think, can't be overstated. Because in difficult situations, it's communication that deflates it and de-escalates it. Now they're equipped to do that because they can communicate with each other. We have now more effective neighbors working together in ways they've not done before. The likelihood of us having to send someone else to go repeat this is less likely because of it. Ultimately, what I'd like to do is to pass on to the next person behind me, to the next generation, to my children, to your children, and to our country, a better situation than we found it. I would not want, my children or their children to have to go and repeat and do what I did, or friends I know, and not come back. What we've done here will make it less likely others will have to pay that price and leave their lives in another part of the world far from home.
We need to look at the past 70 or so years as an aberration in Jewish-Islamic relations, not as the rule. This sort of Jewish-Arab hatred that we have seen, how much of it has been influenced by politics? If you go back and you really look at Arab writings prior to the creation of State of Israel, do you see that same sort of stereotyping, etc.? Of course not. I mean, there was a little here and there, but we know that politics can change things to the better or to the worse. And I think with the Abrahamic Accords, we're trying to change things to the better.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
The Abraham Accords were both celebrated and criticized by the larger international community. Skeptics wondered what these agreements would look like in practice, especially when a meaningful conflict arose. Those tests were yet to come, although the world would not have to wait long. In the interim, more embassies opened. More tourists and business people traveled where they had been prohibited from traveling before. Citizens, and not just politicians, took the meaning and the opportunity of the Abraham Accords into their own hands.
Tens of thousands of Israelis and Emiratis and Bahrainis were visiting one another. By the way, half of the Israelis that traveled to the Emirates were Arab Israelis.
Right.
That's astounding. That is the path forward internally as well. That's hope.
We are all children of Abraham. Abraham asked Allah to make this region safe, secure, and prosperous. It's in our Quran, رب اجعل هذا بلدا آمنا وارزق أهله من الثمرات. And maybe it is now the time.
Next time on the Abraham Accords.
It was a stress test for the Abrahamic Accord.
I'm not following whatever I see in the media because they would show you whatever they want you to see.
They have direct access to us, as we do to them now.
We are creating the perception ourselves. We're learning ourselves. We're taking that responsibility.
Governments initiate things, but the people make it a real peace.
This day is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have prayed for peace. For decades, the Jewish state has prayed for peace. And this is why today we're filled with such profound gratitude. I am grateful to you, President Trump, for your decisive leadership. You have unequivocally stood by Israel's side, and you have successfully brokered the historic peace that we are signing today, a peace that has broad support in Israel, in America, in the Middle East, indeed in the entire world.